Hello and welcome to Fraud Talk, the ACFE's monthly podcast. I'm Rihanna Scoggins, the content manager for the ACFE, and today I'm joined by Kennedy Meda, a seasoned fraud fighter with over a decade of experience combating financial crimes. Known for her expertise in fraud detection, prevention, and risk assessment, Kennedy has led cross-functional teams and developed advanced tools to safeguard organizations against evolving threats both in and outside of the banking industry. Kennedy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's always a great day when we talk about fraud, so I'm really excited.
Definitely. So, artificial intelligence is revolutionizing the banking industry, offering unprecedented tools for fraud detection and prevention. However, alongside its promise comes a new set of challenges. Fraudsters leveraging AI to orchestrate more sophisticated schemes, unintended biases in algorithms, and the delicate balance between automation and human oversight. In this episode, we'll explore AI's double-edged sword in banking. Kennedy, can you tell us a little bit about your journey as a fraud fighter? What sort of sparked your passion for this field specifically?
Yeah. What's interesting is I actually did not plan on coming into fraud. I was actually going down the poli-sci or political science route. And right after high school, I actually was working on John McCain's Recipes to Him, basically handing out flyers door to door, getting people to vote. So I wanted to go down the political science route. I didn't know what I wanted to do in political science, but I knew I wanted to be in political science, maybe a commenter. I'm not really sure. But at the time, while I was doing that, I was introduced to an opportunity to do kind of like a transaction monitoring as an internship. There was like this booth at the time where I was going to ASU where you can come and learn about banking and transactions and whatnot. So I actually joined that internship, and that's when it sparked, not for fraud, but it was actually AML. So the ins and outs of the funds and just watching the payments go through in and out of the network and understanding the behavior of individuals and understanding that you can look at someone's bank statement, for an example, and tell a lot about a person based on their transactional activity and their potential age range, demographics and stuff. So it was really cool that transactions can get down to that granular level, and then how transactions can lead to understanding possible, AML related activity. But what actually sparked my fraud interest, though, is there was someone I was speaking to, and she was just telling me about how, she was scammed. It was like, I can't remember the details, but it was so minute. It was scam, and, she sent her money and she never got the product. And then I was all like, oh, well, you should call the bank. But the problem was she still paid for it. So she couldn't get her money back at the time. So I thought that was really interesting. And so that's when I started looking, Google, looking into scams and going on YouTube University, as they like to call it, and just looking up scams and fraud. And I was like, wow, that's really cool, actually. I mean, fraud is not cool. I don't want to say that, but just the idea of fraud occurring, because I know AML and fraud are totally two different, but once I went and started going into that fraud side, I realized, I don't want to offend anyone, but AML was just so boring for me. It's just very boring, but fraud is just ever changing. It was just amazing. So that's what sparked my interest, was just that little thing that happened to someone new, actually. So her pain was like my future victory. So.
Absolutely. It's incredibly intriguing as a field. Yeah, I think there's this, I think everyone in, fraud struggles with this. Fraud's not cool, but it's cool to think about. It's interesting.
Yeah.
It gets your mind going for sure.
Right. And then how fraudsters think too. And then some of the questions that we'll get into, which is why I was saying I really liked your questions, is just how fraud has shifted from almost a decade ago to now. And like I said, it's just so interesting. It's ever changing. And also, you'll always have a job. When the economy is great, you have a job. When it's terrible, you have a job, because it's just fraud in every industry. So it's pretty interesting.
Definitely. So You've been a key advocate for fraud awareness and prevention. How has the banking industry evolved in its fight against fraud during your career?
Um, I think if we set aside the technology, I think that's easy to, um, I guess, talk about is, of course, the technology, the adaptation into um, new fraud tools. I don't know if I'm allowed to say a vendor, but there's certain vendors who have done like BioCatch. They did a recent report where well over 80% are now adopting AI
Mhm.
technology, from credit unions to mid-sized banks to the large banks across the board adapting AI and technology. But when I started, we didn't have that. I mean, we went from and I don't know if anyone remembers, but putting asterisks when you're writing a SAR so it can get the separations to now you have technology that does, an actual SAR tool where it writes out the SAR for you and deploys bots to grab information for you to assist with the SAR. So you go from asterisks to actual just technology writing out a SAR for you. So it's kind of easy the technology part is easy, but I think the main one aside from technology that I've seen is this approach to educating consumers. That's actually
Mm.
the main thing that I've noticed over a decade is we went from kind of being more reactive, putting out the fire, investigating the case. Maybe you get give the customer back their funds to, okay, now how do we proactively not just prevent fraud with technology, but educate consumers now about the different fraud and scams. Now there's a lot of banks where if you send a transaction now, pop-ups will happen. Are you sure you want to
Mhm.
send that money? This is a particular the way this transaction is. It's related to other customers that have been scammed this type of way. So that's the main thing that I've seen. We went from reactive to proactive with technology and proactive with educating consumers.
Definitely. I love that, that final
Mhm.
statement about going from being reactive to proactive.
Mhm.
It's so funny because the education portion was not something I would have
Mhm.
expected you to say, but
Right.
it's so true. It's so obvious, especially as we look at, different news stories and different banks that
Mhm.
are, now having to,
Lawsuits.
yeah, lawsuits especially.
Mhm.
So that's a really great point.
Right, right. And then also other countries, you have the UK pass that automatic push payments law, putting more
Mhm.
onus on the consumer. Are you taking the time to understand the transaction you're going to send before you get scammed? So it's like taking that big step to now educate the people who actually bank with you. And I think that's what banks should have done years ago. But, we didn't have this type of technology now where I mean, you don't even have to hack an account now. You can just use Chat GPT to get a great script and use basic, human emotion to get
Yeah.
access to someone's account. You don't even need technology for that.
Definitely, definitely.
Mhm,
Now on to AI, right? It's
mhm.
become a game changer in fraud detection and prevention. It's sort of our big buzzword. Everything's about AI. What are some of the most promising applications that you've seen for it in the banking industry?
I think some of the promising ones so far, and I'm not going to name vendors, but I'll say some of the promising applications would be behavioral biometric in particular. I know there's a lot of cool tech out there where it's not just analyzing when someone logs in an account, but it's getting more granular. The typing speed, the mouse movement, the interaction patterns of that individual, kind of like creating like a digital fingerprint per
Mhm.
se. So everyone has a unique way where they, maybe type and, how they hold their phone. Are they left-handed, right-handed? Are you more young? Are you more elderly on how you like maybe type? You get into biases, but sometimes biases help us out here. So I feel like that is one application that's been changing the game a lot in fraud. But of course, there are some negative aspects. I mean, that's helping, but it doesn't necessarily help when you have authorized fraud, which is something we're going through now. But I feel like that's still helping. I think facial recognition and document verification has drastically helped, especially like you said, being here for almost a decade. That has drastically helped. But of course, now we have fraudsters finding out ways to get past that. So And then, of course, automating SARs, and technology and reducing a lot of false positives.
Mhm.
I think that's kind of a double-edged sword. I know some fraud fighters feel like, oh, I'm going to get replaced by AI because now we're going to automate SARs, and we're using AI to clear alerts and reducing false positives. Will we be needed? But at the end of the day, AI cannot replace a human, in my opinion, especially our fraud fighters. So it just helps us out, but there still needs to be someone to validate that. So I think that's also helped take away some of the harshness of doing, as some say, grunt work and fraud when you're starting out, all those alerts and
Mhm.
SAR writing and stuff. So I think that's also helped too.
Absolutely. There still needs to be that human
Hmm.
oversight, right? That's sort of
Right.
the theme of a lot of people in,
Hmm.
anti-fraud work, but especially,
Hmm. Hmm.
using artificial intelligence and,
Right.
creating these different technologies is,
Hmm.
it's we're never going to go away
Exactly.
realistically. Yeah.
Exactly.
So on the flip side, right?
Hmm.
How are fraudsters leveraging AI to exploit, vulnerabilities in the
Hmm.
banking system? Have you
Hmm.
seen any surprising examples of this?
Yeah, what's interesting is we see, of course, AI being used for what we call fraud as a service.
Mhm.
So, and I think this actually touches on your question at the beginning on how fraud has changed since I've been in fraud. Is we've seen fraud as like uh, fraudsters and they're committing fraud or whatnot, but now we see fraud moving as a service. So
Mhm.
fraud is more of a business type of approach. So you actually have fraudsters selling fraud tools
Yeah.
utilizing AI like ChatGPT. You can create an entire phishing kit that you can sell for a certain amount, and then now someone with inexperience can come in, buy that kit, and deploy their own, phishing scheme against a company, individuals. So I think that's the use of AI now has turned fraud into a business. Now you can
Mhm.
upscale it at a higher level, and then also you have new people coming in, young people, which is something we can touch on, but young people even coming in with no experience, making a lot of money, and again, no technical experience, but because of AI, you're able to just buy kits or just use ChatGPT really, and bypass traditional phishing detection. So
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. Last January, I wrote an article for Fraud Magazine about fraud as a
Mhm.
service,
Mhm.
especially like within the deep
Mhm.
web.
Right.
And it's just incredibly fascinating and terrifying at the same time. Some of
Right.
these groups have like full customer service departments for,
Yeah. You can sit on the whole line.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So,
Mhm. Yeah. And
definitely.
it's led to a lot of first party fraud too, because now you can use ChatGPT, to dispute a charge. Now we're
Mhm.
seeing also credit washing where people are literally disputing things on their credit, just using ChatGPT to have the language to actually dispute it with an Experian, a TransUnion, or whatnot. So
Wow.
it's a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Interesting.
Mhm.
So, with AI being such a great tool, both,
Mhm.
fighting fraud and
Mhm.
committing fraud, there's always a risk of over reliance, right?
Right. I agree with
How
that.
do yeah, how do banks strike a balance between automation and, like we said, human oversight in fraud prevention?
Right. I think, like you just said, human oversight is going to be the key thing. Of course, regular updates to AI models, which is should be, in my opinion, the standards. Um, a lot of models that need should have maybe audits of transparency just to prevent any type of discrimination to certain customer bases. As well. But I think the most important one is going to be cross functional collaboration. So
Mhm.
not just your fraud team, but also your data scientists and especially your cybersecurity team. I feel like I understand, fraud and compliance, we work together, whatnot, but I think the biggest one we need is cybersecurity. They have a lot of data, that can help the fraud team, considering that fraud is moving more digital. to begin with. Yes, we've had check fraud bloom, but we've had a lot of digital fraud, and collaborating with cybersecurity is going to help a lot, especially when it comes to updating AI models, changing AI models to fit what cybersecurity is also seeing and what fraud is also seeing on our end. So having that cross-functional collaboration I think is going to be more important.
Absolutely. I think in any industry, but especially right now and with new technology, communication is absolutely key.
Right. And a lot of human oversight, like you were saying. So.
Yeah. So what are some unintended consequences of AI adoption in banking and fraud prevention? Maybe issues like biases or false positives. What are you seeing?
I think I don't necessarily see a lot of, there's false positives, but I don't necessarily see a lot of false positives in my opinion. The main thing that I see is demographic groups being discriminated. Now that is the main thing that I personally say sometimes. And it leads to, in my opinion, unfair accusations of fraud. Sometimes you're so hyper-focused on a group or a region where it's not necessarily fraud. They may just be going through a scam, or they just may be manipulated into doing let's say mule activity or something like that. And then that don't even necessarily know that they're a part of that type of activity. So I think adopting AI is great, but I think it leads into like a gray area of what actually is a fraudster. AI is only looking at the transactional level, but this is where fraud fighters come in, because you're looking at the transactional level. But when you actually talk to the actual customer, you can kind of gauge, after years of experience, you can gauge if they're an actual fraudster or if they were just a victim participating and they didn't even know that they were. So I think that's the thing that I tend to see, not necessarily false positives, but that I don't like saying discriminatory, because it's not necessarily discrimination. It's just maybe disproportionately like biases or something against certain groups. So, and even touching on, let's say elder abuse, for example, there's this notion for some reason that some don't necessarily know what they're doing, but I've talked to a lot, and even visited, nursing homes to educate about fraud. And some of them actually know they're being frauded. They know, and they're fine with it because they've said, like, I just want someone to talk to. And that's really sad. Yeah. You're literally, you're being scammed, but it's that comfort of talking to somebody too. So, the transaction itself may say elder abuse, but it's not, is it? Maybe it is elder abuse because you're taking advantage of someone who's vulnerable, who's willing to give away their funds. But, it's those gray areas,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how do regulations and governance frameworks need to adapt to address, the rapid rise of AI in banking? What do we need to see?
I think we need more cross-border fraud intelligence globally, in my opinion. I think we need to share a lot more data with one another, but of course, there can be pushback from that. And then also a lot more collaborations with international fraud rings. And the reason why I say that is because of fraud being a service now. It's not just some small group of individuals or, down the street from you. Now we have technology, we have social media, we have AI, and now you have fraud being literally, like I said, a service. So it's not just a US service, it's an international service now. I don't know if you heard about what went on out in the UK. It was called the Russian Calm, I believe. And they took down that platform, and millions and millions of money was coming in and out of that platform for fraud. I believe it was like 170,000 people in the UK that were affected. And that government took that particular platform down, and it was literally fraud as a service. And they were getting a lot of recruits through social media internationally, Snapchat, TikTok. And what was interesting is how it was marketed. The way it was marketed, this is autonomous. You're not going to get in trouble, but you'll make a lot of money, which they were, and that's what happened. So I think having a lot more collaboration internationally is going to help a lot. And then understanding fraud as a service and not how we used to view it is also going to help, I feel like.
Another major concern is, especially for banks, is maintaining customer trust when they're using AI-driven systems. What advice do you have for banks to ensure transparency and fairness in their fraud prevention efforts?
I think being open and honest about it. I think consumers and customers or whatnot need to should have the right to know when AI is being utilized. Now, I know we don't want to maybe say that because fraudsters maybe, of course, there's going to be fraudsters in the mix, but I think just being transparent and just, letting the customers know that, hey, we're protecting your funds, and we're using high-end technology to help protect you, but also help us help you as well. Maybe use AI, driven technology to understand the customers who are more prone to scams and why they keep getting, scammed, or if they hate getting fraud on their account. Maybe using AI to understand that and do, I don't know, specific campaigns for those type of groups of people, different pop-ups, emails, just about easy to understand information about fraud and how to protect their account. So I think it's two ways, being honest with the customers that I don't know if you want to say AI is being used, but AI is being used to protect you, but also using AI to understand a true KYC approach for your actual customer base. Understanding why some of the victims are victims, because usually victims tend to be repeated victims of some of these crimes. So understanding why and trying to prevent that from happening instead of debanking them. I believe in debanking, but more steps for debanking some of those high risk individuals more prone to scams and whatnot. So
for sure. So I want to sort of take a step back. We talked about communication and cross-team collaboration. How can organizations build that cross-functional collaboration between fraud, cybersecurity, and compliance teams to maximize their AI potential? What advice do you have for them?
I think the main advice is actually listening to each team. For some reason, there's this push to combine the teams, kind of like, what is that thing? A Framel. I am not a fan of Framel. I feel like AML and fraud are two separate disciplines. It's not because I find AML boring. It's literally two separate disciplines. So I feel like instead of trying to combine, because we all have different disciplines, we have different backgrounds, and we view customer accounts and transactions vastly differently from one another. But I think instead of fusing them together, at true collaboration, what are you seeing here? What are you seeing there? What are you seeing? What are the issues within your side? And how can we fill those holes that you actually have? Because sometimes there's holes that cybersecurity is missing and they don't even realize that's over here in fraud. And all you need is just to plug us in instead of us coming in and change your domain, just coming in and plug in certain pieces. So I think that's probably the best way, is understanding each domain, the limitations of each domain, and figuring out how can we collab together seamlessly instead of trying to take over. And yeah. And then also understanding that you're not the smartest person in the room. I think that's the one of the most important pieces of collaboration is there's always going to be someone who knows more than you. So it's good to just be quiet. You don't know their domain. Just listen, and ingest it, you know what I mean? And maybe go out of your way to just learn just a little bit, which in turn can also help you as well. So just, I don't know, being humble together and learning from one another.
Definitely.
Long-winded answer, but
no, it's absolutely true. I think that, allowing these teams to be separate, but still connected, acknowledges both their strengths and their weaknesses. And like you said, acknowledges that you're not the smartest person in the room. And sort of let experts be experts, but then to also share your expertise.
Exactly. Kind of like, I hate to say, like, I don't know, like a marriage. Being married for so long, we have our weaknesses and our strengths, and you let the other person do their thing, I do my thing, and let's collaborate and work together. So it's like that.
Absolutely. So final question. What excites you the most about the future of fraud prevention? And how can professionals stay ahead of the curve in this evolving space?
I would say what excites me is the change. Now, I may go on a rant here, but it's just the overall change in fraud. Like I said, a decade ago, just setting aside the technology aspect, we can even go into like the demographic. Fraud used to be, fraudsters used to be what, males between the ages of, I'm not being biased. Women can be fraudsters. I'm just saying. But I'm just saying. Just like, let me put that caveat. But between like what 31 to 46, was the typical age of a fraudster, a male fraudster. But now we're seeing an entire shift because fraud is now as a service, and it's being marketed on social media. Now we're seeing more young people doing fraud and doing these mass cyber attacks, which is insane. Like the MGM. Microsoft, Apple, just attacking these companies. And I think what makes it interesting, albeit scary, is when you're dealing with like young people. I'm a millennial, so I'm not being biased. I'm just saying, when you're dealing with Gen Zers, I have Gen Zer siblings, okay? But when you're dealing with Gen Zers, fraudsters in particular, it's not just about the money like the old days where they want to make money, whatever. It's more like a social, like we want to take down corporate greed, or I want to be on the Discord with my friends and brag how I was able to steal 300 million in Bitcoin, or like, I want to be like this big fraudster and be, famous within my community online, It's more deeper than just making money. And that's what makes it kind of dangerous with these monsters, is they're more likely to push the envelope versus, you're going to do fraud. Back in the day, more older, more conditioned. I'll do fraud. I'll make my money. The bank will pay back the customer. Hopefully I don't get caught. Now it's like, I don't care if I get caught. And even if I get caught, I'll be all over the news. I'll be on a couple of kids and I can just brag about it on TikTok, So it's like really interesting to see how fraud went from that to more public socialite. You can become like this top dog fraud fighter, fraudster. And I think that's what makes me excited about the future of fraud, because the behavioral tactics are now different. The age demographic is now different. And then now you're dealing with like a whole network of it being marketed as a business now. So I think that's what I'm excited about. And I think my advice to other fraud fighters or people who are looking to get into fraud is just being open to how it changes. Instead of thinking of fraud constantly being like this in a square peg, you have to understand that it's always going to change and be accepting of that, instead of thinking, oh, well, it's just like this and we're going to work it like this. And it's like, no, it's actually changed over decades. So we're dealing with a new age group of people. We're dealing with how it's being done. Now you're adding in social media, and then you're adding in this. I don't understand the toxicity of TikTok, but TikTok is very toxic in my opinion. So now you're adding that in, where they're just doing TikToks on card fraud, and they're dancing to it. It's like insane. So I think just constantly being out there and aware, and I sound a little bit too excited, but being slightly more excited than normal about it, because it'll constantly just be more engaging to you if you're excited about it. So another long-winded response, but it's just changed so much. Just be prepared for it. And also never feel like you're going to be replaced by AI. I feel like the moment you start feeling like you're going to be replaced by AI, that you may end up getting replaced by AI. Utilize AI, understand it, get AI related certifications, get certifications pertaining to what era that we're in. Cryptocurrency, go and get, the cryptocurrency related fraud investigation certification, constantly do more education, push yourself. Don't ever feel like you're going to be replaced. There was advice that, and I'll end with this, that someone gave me years ago, that the only person who can give success is yourself. You can't depend on other people. You can't whine about it. You can't be scared. Only you can give your own self success, regardless of what that is in life. So that is like something I would probably say.
I love that so much. I think that's such great advice and so true about, once you've sort of decided that you're going to get replaced, it's happening. There's so much growth and there's so much, information available to you. You just have to keep searching it out.
Exactly. And understand that fraud is big. You don't have to be stuck, in financial fraud. I've touch other areas, federal level, airlines. So there's so many different ventures of fraud. And my husband says, where there's human, there's fraud.
Yeah.
There's always going to be fraud somewhere. I mean, there's fraud even with fish. So just always being open to, if you get forward with financial fraud, talk to other people in other industries within fraud, maybe, the tech side with bricking devices and returning it back. So there's just so many different avenues. You're never going to get bored. It's just honestly up to you what you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for all of your insight. And thank you for listening. You can find this podcast along with all other episodes of Fraud Talk on acfe.com, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This has been Rihanna Scoggins signing off.